Well, Mark suggests the parables are obscure, but I have a feeling that's actually Mark. I don't think parables require some sort of special answer key, because if they did, I'm not sure why anybody would have remembered them in the first place. Moreover, although the Gospel of Mark tells us that Jesus explained everything to the disciples about the parables in private, most of those explanations have not come down to us. So that is, in effect, the canon. The Gospel's inviting us, you engage in these conversations and you try to work with those parables to see how they hit you. I don't think they're esoteric. I don't think they're particularly mysterious. But I do also think that they are mature stories designed for adults. They're designed to challenge. They're designed to indict. They're designed to shake us up. And most people don't want stories that do that. We just want to be complacent. We want to be happy where we are. We just want to say, oh, yeah, love God, love neighbor. And that's about it. And Jesus says, no, you have to do more. You have to think more. You have to figure out what it means to be a human being and what it means to live in the world. Let the parables help you by challenging your preconceptions, challenging your ideas of the way the world works, and perhaps allowing you to see some other way the world should be. We could call that the kingdom of heaven. Jesus spoke Aramaic and Hebrew possibly as well, and perhaps a smattering of Greek. The parables come to us in the Greek text, and now we translate them into English. So there's always going to be slippage between what Jesus said and what got recorded, and then what happens as we move from language to language. I tend to look at parables much as I would understand folk tales or fairy tales. The structural outline, I think, will remain the same. Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. The story changes as we move, say, from France to Germany to China, but it's still the same story and you can recognize it. So I have a sense that these parables, which are quite short anyway, the building blocks of those parables will remain the same. Does this get us back to the historical Jesus? Well, perhaps, but I don't know if Jesus spoke all those parables. He might have had, some lady friend who came up with a couple of good ideas and then he got credit for them. But I would have to invent other people who then invented the parable genre. And what I find frequently in the Gospels is the evangelists, the Gospel writers, telling me what the parables mean. And immediately they turn the parables into allegories, as if, again, you need some sort of special answer key. If I see Luke wrestling with a parable, I have a feeling Luke picked up that parable from tradition, and then Luke wants to rein in the parable's freedom and say, oh, it's all about this or it's all about that. So if we can extract, and here it's an act of historical imagination, if we can extract the parables from their narrative context and imagine what they would have sounded like to a bunch of Galileans in the late 20s of the first century, we hear something a little bit different than what we get through their gospel embeddedness. That doesn't mean you throw away what the Gospels have to say. Rather, you add that historical material to make Jesus, in fact, look even more profound and even better teacher. I think my favorite parable is usually the parable I happen to be working on at the moment. I'm really attracted to the three parables in Luke chapter 15, sometimes called the parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the lost coin, the parable of the prodigal son. But again, parables don't come with titles, and it's not as if Jesus is walking around with like 3x5 note cards with, the one about the sheep, the one about the kid. If I read those parables together, what I really find is not so much a focus on the lost sheep or the lost coin, but it's the person doing the searching, the all-out searching. Call it the parable of the frantic sheep owner, or the parable of the desperate housewife. And then the parable of the father who thinks he's lost his son, but the lost son is not the prodigal. The lost son is that angry older brother in the field who hears the noise of music and dancing and has to ask what happens. And a slave says, oh, your brother's come home and dad killed the fatted calf. In other words, they had enough time to call the band and the caterer, and nobody thought to go search for the older brother. And every time I read that, I'm just struck by that. Whom have I forgotten to call? Whom have I forgotten to count? There's a man who had 2 sons. He didn't count.